Welcome to the Chief of Cybersecurity podcast, where we discuss relevant information concerning the cybersecurity workforce, business development, and best practices, made possible by CMIS. Learn more at CMIS.net. And for a list of authorized publications, visit DewayneHart.com. And now, here's your host, Dewayne Hart.
Welcome back. So today's podcast session is going to be much more interesting because this podcast session is going to focus on some of the cybersecurity basics and really expand knowledge into understanding why it's important to secure your environment, but also to what are some of the approaches that you can use to secure your environment, because cybersecurity has a lot of intricate pieces to itself. Enterprises have a lot of intricate pieces to itself. And really, what is the simplest way to go put the puzzle together? So what I would like for my listeners to do today is to think about a puzzle. Think about all the pieces that make up that puzzle and how when you take that puzzle and you lay everything out on the table and you got to scramble through all the different pieces just to get that puzzle together. All right, because there's certain pieces that are going to work together and there are certain pieces of the puzzle that will not work together. And it's the same concept when it comes to cybersecurity. And it's about thinking holistically about what you're doing. And this models system thinking, okay? If you look at the puzzle and you think about cybersecurity, that's probably millions of pieces that can operate, but do they all fit together? And you as a cybersecurity steward has to figure out how do you make all these pieces operate together. So today's topic, utilizing a holistic defense approach to securing your environment, it's going to talk about everything that I have just brought up. So, let's just roll into something else here that I always like to talk about is the goals and outcome. We're going to start by defining holistic defense, all right? Then after that, I want to roll into the cybersecurity connection. As with every podcast session I have, I always like to look at the cybersecurity connection, because once you understand the connection, then you can better understand the podcast session. So the cybersecurity connection with holistic defense, what does it mean? Okay, so we're going to dive into that. Layered security and defense in depth. These are probably terms that are so close to each other, but these are practices that can be used to secure your environment, because a lot of times organizations are working in very high tempo environments, and you need to have cybersecurity operating at so many angles. So how do you really put that puzzle together and make it operate? This is what layer security and defense in depth is going to talk about. Then I'm going to roll into what are some vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities are that if you're not thinking holistically about the way you defend enterprises, what type of problems that could occur? What are those vulnerabilities that may exist in your corporation or project or task that you're responsible for? And last, let's make holistic defense successful. This is best practices, okay? Because there are ways that each type of methodology can have problems, but then there are ways to make them successful. So we're going to really roll into that and find out some ways to make it successful. All right, so let's roll into our practical definition of holistic defense. From the top level, it's viewing security from each process, operation, or the entire security picture. So when you think about that puzzle, think about all the pieces that go along with that puzzle, all right? And think about each one of those being a part of cybersecurity. And your job is to look at all of those intricate pieces and to figure out how they work together. And in the cybersecurity world, we always talk about a cybersecurity architect. So this is the cybersecurity architect. Now, Now, to make a decision on how they work together is where security engineering comes to surface, because engineering is designing ways to have cybersecurity to operate. If you think about someone that is trying to find innovative ways to bring a new software application on the enterprise, this is part of the engineering perspective. And that software application is part of the architect. And the architect is that picture for cybersecurity itself. There's something called the 360 degree of security visibility. In my book, I talked about this a lot because when you look at that puzzle, you want to have a view of everything, okay? You want to be around security, you know. You want 360 degree of security visibility, okay? All right? So that means that for that circle, you're going around 360 degrees, all right? And it's a continuous process. Protecting the architect is really what holistic defense is all about, okay? When you look at the architect and you look at your cloud, your data, your identity, looking at your network and looking at the infrastructure type of devices that you have, the whole premise is to protect that. But in the middle of all that is data, okay? And data is moving amongst all of those. And you as a cybersecurity steward has to find ways to protect that information in that architect. And part of that is to understand how security engineering operate and to have that system thinking concept. Okay, now speaking of system thinking, this is where the system development lifecycle comes to surface. Every cybersecurity steward has heard of the word SDLC, and it's about trying to design a system, okay? And you have to think holistically about the way that you design this system, because if you design it the wrong way, then you cannot secure that environment. If you really think about the terms such as analyze, okay, where you analyze all of your requirements, then you design your requirements. Then after that, you may develop your requirements, okay? Then you implement your requirements, okay? Okay? And then the last stage is just your evaluation. And this is a cycle. And as that system begins to mature and you want to add on some new services or operation, well, you have to do that cycle again. And you have to think holistically about this. It's what are all the moving parts that go along with this system? Okay, because there is a lot of moving parts to a cybersecurity environment. Okay, and all those, and you know, those moving parts are sometimes outside of cybersecurity itself, because cybersecurity itself interrelates to data, to program management, your technology investments, thinking about your vendors. See, that's a lot of moving parts. But if you think holistically about the way you approach cybersecurity, then you can secure the environment. So some of the other factors is that layered defense is very important. And as I move through the podcast session, I am going to eventually get to layered defense, and I just want to save it for now. And I want to roll into the cybersecurity connection. Okay. Here is the cybersecurity connection. Okay. It's about risk-based thinking. In my book, The Cybersecurity Mindset, I talked about risk-based thinking. It's just looking at the entire scope and the picture of the enterprise and figuring out exactly where your problems are. Okay. Create a big picture view for businesses, operations, cybersecurity. I see who is responsible. Okay. This is the premises of cybersecurity and the holistic defense model here. Okay. You got a big picture view of everything. Think about the fact that you just put the puzzle together and you hang it on the wall, and you step back and you look at that puzzle. That's your big picture view. All right. And you see all the intricate pieces of that puzzle that are working together. System thinking, okay? System thinking is about looking at all of the components out there and seeing how all of those components interrelate amongst each other, all right? Some of those pieces that operate under system thinking is a framework for protection. I always talk about ATL, administrative, technical, and operational standards are really required as well too, because you cannot think holistically about trying to protect an environment if you're not looking at the administrative policies. Policies are written down on paper, but they're very important too. And the technical aspect of the system and all the technology and operations as ongoing type of continuous work that is happening. Okay. Address security as an enterprise standards versus a silo. Okay. A silo is just like in one corner. When you have that system thinking concept, like you start to bring up the big picture and you look at all the codependencies, okay? And you look at all the relationships that they have amongst each other. This is where that security engineering is coming to surface now, because you're looking at the pieces of the puzzle, and what you're trying to do is to figure out which pieces work together. And if they don't work together, then you have to go through a configuration management process so you can understand how they operate. Because there's certain tools, applications, and software programs that do not work on certain enterprises. And if you're trying to design the system and if you're trying to secure it, then you have to be thinking about what is best for your architect. I've seen it before where certain software applications was bought because they seem pretty, because they look good, but then when you put them on the enterprise, it was hard to configure those applications. And part of the holistic defense principle is to test it out first. Okay, testing is part of the holistic defense principle as well, because certain times you got to test these applications and type of devices out before you put them on your enterprise. Because if you don't test them out and you spend millions of dollars purchasing these pieces of equipment, well, you're stuck with them. Because the vendor is in business, okay? A vendor wants to sell you their product, all right? So you always keep that in mind. Organizational, people, process, and procedures, all right? Understanding that people, process, and procedures are very important, because you always want to look at people and looking at your workforce program. Look at your processes. This is where ITIL comes to surface, okay? Look at your procedures, okay? Step-by-step guides that you have in place to go defend your enterprise. One of the things I learned early on in my cybersecurity career when I was working for the government, and I started off by actually working through an RMF for a large software application. The risk management framework has 17 control families. And if you go through those control families, and if you have to implement any of those security controls, they all represent the architect of that environment. And as I was going through the assessments, I was learning more about these systems, and I was seeing the big picture concept. All of these controls that are designed for that particular architect, you have to assess that architect to make sure they were implemented, and this is where the security engineering concept comes to surface. All right? I'm going to talk about more of that later on as we move into layer security and defense in depth. Includes new modernization standards such as workforce development? Yes. Okay, because the holistic defense principle is really just looking at the entire picture, because you cannot leave out the workforce. Because if you don't have the right people to do the job, then, you're going to fail. So in that picture, there's a certain way that you put people in that architect so that they can operate and make your cybersecurity program successful as well. Okay, so let's roll into something else that is very important too, and let's talk about layered security and defense in depth. Okay. Defense in depth would be closer to a multi-faceted strategic plan where layered security would be one aspect of defense. So you think about those 17 type of control families that you have, right? Okay. And they all fall around human, physical, endpoint, network, application, and data. Those are layered security concept, okay? Because what you're doing is that you are making sure that all the platforms have security implemented, okay? All right. Now these are your platforms. And layered security arises from the desire to cover for the failings of each component by combining components into a single comprehensive strategy. So what that means is that I take my human, my physical, endpoint, network, application, and data, right? And so I combine them together, okay? So they can give me that one big picture, all right? Now, defense in depth is entirely different because it addresses redundancy, okay? If I have an attack on my enterprise, what are some of the security thought processes that actually should be in place? All right. It ensures that security is well thought and addressed. Okay. If you think about the facts such as this, right? If you were to look at a cybersecurity attack, okay, well, you put the layered defenses in place, such as your firewalls, such as making sure that the endpoints are protected through HPSS. Applications are also protected as well, right? So you make sure of that. But also too, you got to have a well thought out process on how to make those operate. And that's where defense in depth comes into place because it's a redundancy process. It says, okay, then if someone infiltrate my firewall, then how can I respond? Okay. All right. Now what happens is that you're looking at it from a larger view. So you can think about layered defense as the first level and defense in depth as that second level that expands things out. Okay. The military has been using defense in depth principles for a long time. Here's something else interesting about defense in depth. If one line of defense is compromised, additional layers of defense are in place to ensure that threats do not slip through the cracks. Okay. So when you have a cyber incident that happens, okay, you are always thinking, okay, if you break through my firewall, then I'm going to make sure that I have an IDS in place that can reach your profile. And my IDS is going to send this alert out, and then I can have somebody to manually go over there to actually break your connection. All right. So you think about defense in depth just takes things to a larger magnitude, and it's about redundancy. Layered defense itself is just making sure that you have these different platforms in place. All right. So those are two great principles to know when you are trying to secure your environment: layered security and defense in depth. Now, outside of this, there are some vulnerabilities. So let's talk about some vulnerabilities here. All right. Vulnerabilities are caused because defense in depth is broken, layered defense improperly defined, and also, too, you can have a decentralized architect. What I mean by a decentralized architect is that if you're a large enterprise and you have 15 departments and each department carry out cybersecurity in their own fashion, all right, that just breaks the premises of cybersecurity for that organization itself. If you have 15 departments and if you centralize your cybersecurity services, then there are some advantages. Streamline management. Okay. Streamline management means that there's a tunnel vision. Okay. when you think about holistic defense, you always got to look at the complete architect. You just can't look down a tunnel and say that I just want to focus on cloud. No, you got to look at the entire picture. Forget people-centered concerns. People are your weakest and your strongest link, okay? Think about people and how they fit within this whole entire scheme of holistic defense. No systemic approach, okay? I mean, you got to have system thinking in place, and you have to be thinking based on a system concept, okay? Because a system is pretty much encompasses a lot of moving parts, and you have to know what those moving parts are. No inventory of assets and where security operates. Yeah. If you don't know what's on your enterprise, then you cannot holistically defend that enterprise. Knowing all your assets, knowing how those assets operates. Now, I will admit, if you got 100,000 endpoints, you would probably need a separate team to really have 100% accurate a count on those. But for the most part, you want to have a high percentage count of your assets on your enterprise. Okay. One of the other thing is responsible actions and ownership. In my book, The Cybersecurity Mindset, I talked about this a lot. It's that people taking ownership, okay, for their actions. Okay. You cannot pass cybersecurity around. In some fashion, everyone that works in IT has a unique responsibility to cybersecurity itself. I also like to think about the responsible actions and ownership as accountability, because there's certain teams and people that do not want to hold themselves accountable. Well, it's the cybersecurity people's job. Okay. You want to pass the buck around. Yes, cybersecurity people are responsible in so many ways for like cybersecurity, but as a team-based concept, everybody is responsible. So just keep that in mind as well too. Now, we can make holistic defense very, very, very successful. Here's how I feel we can do it. Create a buy-in structure. A buy-in structure talks about having a culture of people that wants to be on board with cybersecurity and to look at cybersecurity as something that can be successful. If you don't have a buy-in structure, what's going to happen is you're going to have these bad behavioral patterns where people don't care about the enterprise, where your programs are going to fail. So you have to have a buy-in structure. Design system models. Yeah. Okay. Because you need to have a system model in place. A system model is saying, okay, this is the system and this is how the system operates. And, this is the thinking we want to have in place so that we can be successful. Know your environment. This goes back to situational awareness. All right. So if you really think about holistic defense, and if I brought in the cybersecurity mindset, it is about taking those 20 chapters in the book and making those 20 chapters work inside of your security architect. Creating working relationships. Yeah. You take the business end and you take the IT end and just have everybody to work together. Modernize with a typical technologies that work. Sounds good, no good. Okay, here goes the concept here. There are different technologies that are built that are not right for every enterprise. When you as a corporation do a complete assessment of your enterprise, you will be able to modernize and to know what works in your enterprise or not. I am talking about technology tools. I am talking about training programs. I am also talking about processes. Maybe it's not conducive for an organization to go to the cloud. Okay, maybe you're better off by having on-prem. Okay, maybe the upgrade to like Windows 11 is not appropriate for your enterprise because maybe out of 100,000 assets, Okay, there's only 5 of those that need to be upgraded, and they only get used maybe once a month. Do you want to bring that technology investment on board? Okay, so you kind of have to have those concepts in mind. Practice defense in depth. Okay, think about redundancy. Think about a well thought out plan for cybersecurity. Okay, do not overlook continuous monitoring. I want to really talk about that for a second, because continuous monitoring is that ongoing effort. Once you put that puzzle together, you cannot sit there and say, okay, everything is loaded now and my puzzle is going to stay together. Trust me, there's always going to be some intricate problems that occur where you have to go back through your puzzle and re-engineer different functions, because cybersecurity is always changing. So that means that your cybersecurity architect is probably going to change because of the new technologies. Maybe you brought on some new vendors, and your vendors only use a certain application tool. Well, you may have to purchase that application tool. Now that changes your complete architect. The old way of doing business may not even work. Now, what happens is that maybe you need to go to the new way of doing business. So continuous monitoring is very important, because continuous monitoring is everything that we should be doing to protect those environments. When you think about holistic defense, that's where continuous monitoring comes to surface. You have a continuous look into your environment from a system thinking concept, and knowing that all the engineering practices are subjected to change. And this is where configuration management comes to surface, because you want to protect the architect. And some of those protection standards are isolation is one. The data traffic. Think about the behavioral norms from your employers. Think about workforce development. Think about vendor engagement. Okay, those are very, very, very important topics. So with this holistic defense approach, it has been around for a bit. When I was doing my research to deliver some information that I thought was important to my listeners out there, I went through my cybersecurity mindset book, and I remember I had wrote a piece on this, and I used it a lot to explain topics in the book, and I decided to bring it to the podcast session because I felt, hey, I think this would be something great for my listeners. So just keep in mind that holistic defense principles are aligned to all areas of technology. All right. One of the things that you have to keep in mind is that when you are trying to protect those environments, you are going to need certain tools. And these tools are part of your architect. When I was at a conference about 3 weeks ago, I saw a lot of threat intelligence tools. I saw a lot of new tools that are designed for automation. And I was just overwhelmed at the amount of tools out there, but not all of those tools are good for every enterprise. And certain corporations will purchase a lot of tools because they feel they need to purchase those tools just to get their cybersecurity program in operation. Now, you may need several tools, but the idea is that you have to test those tools out because that's part of holistic defense. All right. So what I wanted to say is that in this next episode, how to effectively use cybersecurity tools, it's beyond reporting. I am going to talk about these cybersecurity tools, and I'm going to focus beyond just those reports that you get from those tools and lay out a structured way that you can understand how to decide on the best tools for your environment and why tools are very important as well. So I will see you in episode 12.
You've been listening to the Chief of Cybersecurity podcast, where you have gained relevant knowledge to enhance your cybersecurity mindset. Be sure to visit DewayneHart.com to learn more about authored publications, show notes, and discover more information concerning cybersecurity.